If you were living in the 80s, then you definitely realize how different things used to be. Today's homes just don't feel the same on the inside. Many of the items that we had in our homes have either changed or are no longer popular to have. In this video, we will have a look back at some of the popular items that everyone had in their 80s homes. Televisions in the 80s were not slim and sleek with flat screens like you see today. In fact, they couldn't be more opposite. They were actually big, bulky pieces of furniture made out of wood. The wood had intricate details and carvings as well as handles that made it look like it had drawers, but it did not. These television sets were not just an entertainment source. They were an essential piece of decor in the living room. They were pretty heavy and almost the same weight as a naval destroyer, so someone wasn't just going to walk out the house with one. By the end of the 80s and into the 90s, some of the TV sets started going out. But people loved these so much that they had a newer and smaller TV sitting on top of this console TV. It was pretty hard for people to let this piece of furniture go. If you wanted to check your voicemail in the 1980s, then you had to use a standalone answering machine. These machines used a cassette tape to record incoming messages. When a call came in that wasn't answered after a set number of rings, the machine would pick up the call and play a pre-recorded greeting. Following the beep, the caller would then leave a message which was recorded on the tape. In order to hear that message, you'd press a button to play back the tape. In the later 80s, you may have seen some commercials on television that had some funny answering machine tapes that were available for purchase. Tupperware was in every household in the 80s. Usually it was the standard colors of the 70s, which was orange, green, yellow, and brown. Once you had bought some of these, there was never any need to buy more. They were tough and practically indestructible. The lids on the Tupperware were in a sunburst pattern and they definitely sealed the freshness in. Not even a tornado could pull that lid off. Most of these came from Tupperware parties, which were hosted at someone's house, and it was a side income for a stay-at-home mom. Google was unheard of in the 80s, which is why practically every household had an entire set of encyclopedias. This was how we looked something up that we needed to know. Your encyclopedia set could have been 5, 10, or 20 years old, and that was perfectly fine. Information did not seem to change quite as much. In the 80s, it was common to see commercials on television that were selling encyclopedias, but occasionally you might encounter a door-to-door salesman at your home. The fidget toy of the 80s was the Rubiks Cube. It really took the world by storm and they sold millions of them. It seemed like everyone had one, but not everyone could solve one. There was a Rubik's Cube solving book for sale, but even that did not help everyone. Some people resorted to peeling the stickers off and then placing them back onto the cube in colored matching order, while others just took it apart and put it back together. People have been spoiled now for decades because of DVDs, Blu-rays, and of course streaming services like Netflix. But in the 80s, we had VCRs that we used in order to watch movies at home. These VHS cassette tapes were a lot tougher than DVDs and Blu-rays. The only downside to them was how you had to rewind the tape so that you could watch the movie again later. Those movie nights at home were always great if you had some popcorn, and back then a microwave wasn't even necessary. Most people used an air popper or hot oil popper that had a distinctive sound and smell that you will never forget. They really did make the best buttery popcorn that you could ever have. These appliances were a staple in just about every household. Another plug-in device that you would have seen in every household was the AM/FM clock radio alarm clock. They were typically found with a lot of switches and buttons and were all encased in a fancy fake wood grain. Most of the clocks had red digital numbers, but occasionally you might see one in green or even analog flipping numbers. But one thing is for sure, it would certainly wake you up if you heard the alarm sound. TV trays were an essential item in every household. They were handy and could easily transform your living room into a makeshift dining room so that you could watch your favorite show or movie without missing anything. Maybe you didn't eat your meals on this, but you certainly used them to hold your popcorn and tab. These TV trays were so handy that you never knew when you might need them, which is why most people kept them folded up on a rack next to the couch just in case. If you ever visited Grandma's house during the 80s, then I'm sure that you checked out her glass candy dish. They were often filled with Werther's, chocolates, or heaven forbid the ribbon candy that was left over from last Christmas. You know, the kind where you try to pick up one piece and then everything in the dish came out with it. In the 80s, we loved our fruit and we also loved to display it. The problem was, real fruit collected fruit flies, which is why we had these. This fake fruit sat on the table or counter and collected dust. It was all about decoration rather than nutrition, although those spongy rubber grapes were pretty fun to chew on. Gaming consoles at home became extremely popular during the 80s. If you were talking about the first half of the decade, then it was all about Atari with Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Frogger. If it was the later half of the decade, then it was all about Nintendo with Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Magazines were something that could be found in every household. Everyone had them, from kids to adults. Teenagers adorned the walls of their rooms with pages and posters that came from the magazines. But one necessary item that could be found in every living room was the magazine rack. Some of these were standalones, while others were an addition onto a side table. There they were always handy to hold your favorite magazines to pick up and read just in case there was nothing on television. Ashtrays were another item that was commonly found in households. Many of them were pretty fancy and came in mustard-colored glass or rust-colored glass. It was also pretty common for kids to make an ashtray at school for their parents or grandparents in the earlier part of the decade. But chances are you had at least one of these ashtrays, whether it was for you or your guest. Today we have Tempur-Pedic beds and Sleep Number beds, but not in the 80s. If you were looking for something different, then it had to be a waterbed. They were all the rage back then, and if you couldn't go to the ocean, then why not sleep on it? These beds were great to have until you accidentally popped it and water went everywhere. Boomboxes were portable and powerful stereos that allowed people to carry their favorite music anywhere from the house to the lake. These became extremely popular during the 80s, and many of them had dual cassette tape decks, which allowed people to copy and share commercial albums with their friends. Board games were something that every household had. Back then, it was popular to have family and friends over for a little gaming fun. There were plenty of the classics around, like Monopoly and Clue, but one of the biggest of the decade was Trivial Pursuit. Everyone wanted a little piece of that pie. The 1980s was a very unique time that was sort of a transitional decade. We had a lot of items from previous decades, but we also had some items that were the beginning of what was yet to come. Time and technology would propel us into the future, but we will always have our memories. What were some of your favorite items of the 80s? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.